Hello, thank you for joining me. Welcome to the Surviving Maya Codices and the Knowledge They Possess. So what are the available resources for study of the Maya? There are 3 authentic codices, the Madrid Codex, the Dresden Codex, and the Paris Codex, with these 3 codices being attributed to the pre-Hispanic Maya era, and they came to light in European collections in the 18th and 19th centuries, and they are named for the cities where they're currently housed. These Maya codices represent a primary source of information on pre-Hispanic culture and religion. There is one disputed codex, the Grolier Codex. We will come back to that later. So where did the codices get their names? As previously stated, they come from the European cities where they're housed, so let's look at specifics. The Dresden Codex is a late classic Maya manuscript that's now in the Royal Public Library of Dresden, Germany. The Madrid Codex is the longest codex, and for more than a century it has been curated in a museum in Spain, now the Museum de America in Madrid. And exactly where this book was written and when it reached Spain have been quite uncertain, and this is something to be said for all of the codices. It's unknown how they got to where they are. The Paris Codex, while referenced in the articles that I used for my research, was not specifically noted, and while it can be assumed that it is housed in Paris, as that would have been the European city, and it was referenced, it is not specifically stated. The fourth, the Grolier Codex, is known as the Grolier following its exhibition by the Grolier Club in New York in 1971. It was recovered from a cave believed to be in Chiapas, Mexico in the 1960s, and was found along with several pre-Columbian artifacts, including sheets of blank fig bark paper, which is what the codices are written on. So what happened to the other codices and manuscripts? In the mid-16th century, Spanish forces destroyed the written records in an attempt to eradicate Mayan religion to make conversion to Catholicism easier. The different resources do argue a little bit on who was involved, but they do concur on the why. Sorg tells of it being Franciscan missionaries with only 3 or 4 Maya codices surviving, here referencing that there could be 4, while Vail et al. Tells of it being Spanish civil and religious authorities and that records exist of these destructions. So they do differ on who was responsible, but they do agree that it was to make the conversion to Catholicism easier and an attempt to get rid of anything reminding the Maya of their culture and their religion. So let's look closer at the disputed authenticity of the Grolier Codex. I will look at the arguments for and arguments against. Starting with the argument for its authenticity, some of the scholars who have argued this are John Carlson, who has written several articles, and Michael Coe, who collaborated with Houston and wrote an article about this. The biggest thing arguing for its authenticity in the presence of Maya blue, which is a natural pigment that could not have been synthesized by a forger during the 60s when the Grolier was discovered. There was also no modern inorganic materials and thus no evidence of modern forgery found by the study done by Rubalcaba discussed in the article used for my research. While there is an argument for the information in this codex appearing differently than the other 3, this is not the only codical text that, when compared with others, depicts information differently, and so this argument can be used both for and against. While the argument against its authenticity, the scholars who have challenged this are Eric Thompson, Susan Mulbraith, Claude Baudez, and Nancy Kelker and Karen Bruns in their collaboration. There are some challenges to radiocarbon dating the Grolier, which would make defining its authenticity easier. 4 were talked about in this article. Lack of chain of custody of the samples, unknown degree of contamination, lack of control over when and how the amat fibers were manufactured. The 4th and fatal flaw, that even if the amat itself could be reliably dated, it would not tell us when the plaster and paint were applied to the paper to create the codex. So while dating it would be helpful, it also can't be certain. Another big argument is the appearance of the pages of the Grolier Codex when looked at in comparison to the other 3 known codices. The 3 Maya codices that have been universally accepted as authentic have rounded edges with exposed fibers where the plaster and paint has gradually worn away over time. Nowhere does the plaster come out of the paper, and nowhere are the edges jagged and sharp as they appear with the Grolier. The author of the article, Love, states, "The Grolier to me appears to be intentionally mutilated, and the Rubalcaba team doing the research and inspected with microscopes, they say the same. There appear to be cut edges, and it seems like there is induced degradation." Let's look at the discrepancies of information. From the information within the Grolier Codex, there is a clear difference with how the other 3 codices depict things. There is a standard use of ring numbers that's found in many sections of the Dresden Codex, and that also appears in the single ring number found at Zotuln, and there is one Dresden almanac that uses rings in a different way. while the ring numbers in the Grolier Codex are nothing like either of these and would be aberrant in any known Mesoamerican system of numeration. But as stated earlier, the Grolier is not the only codex these discrepancies of information can be found in. So let's look at two discrepancies in particular in the Dresden Codex. The first involves both the Dresden and the Madrid Codex. One of the more interesting examples of classic period text recorded in a late post-classic manuscript, presumably through copying from an earlier source, involved the seasonal table in the Dresden Codex, which has a cognate and almanac form in the Madrid Codex, pages listed here. The other involves listing of the four directions. Now, typically, in the codices, they're depicted as east, north, west, and south, but in an example found and discussed by Vail and Hernandez, this was not the case. So let's look at what could be causing these discrepancies. Vail and Hernandez together suggest that scribes were responsible for these errors, and in reference to the four directions issue I just talked about, we believe this is yet another example indicating the likelihood that almanacs were copied from earlier sources by late post-classic scribes. Transcriptional error of this nature would have been far more likely to have occurred in the act of copying rather than when the almanac was originally composed, while Vail on her own suggests it could be a language or cultural translation causing them. Stating an almanac or text may have been comprised originally by a Cholin speaker, but the same text appearing in the Madrid or Dresden Codex may have been recopied by a Yucatec speaker or vice versa. In other words, the language recorded in codical text does not necessarily reflect that of the scribes who copied and drafted the almanacs and tables composing what we know of today as the Maya Codices. So let's talk about some of the amazing knowledge that can be gained from the codices. From them, we learned about the culture the Maya had and what they were able to develop. I'm going to look at two authors that look at some of these amazing advances. Frederick Martin looks at the understanding the Maya had of the stars, noting the eclipse tables and the Dresden Codex are one aspect of Mesoamerican calendrical science that has defied facile comprehension, going on to state that it seems obvious that Maya astronomers constructed the Dresden table after a long process of observation, which they would have needed to gain the vast information they depicted there. But science and the stars are not the only thing to be learned from the codices. Another author, Laura Elena Sotelo Santos, looks at some of the amazing developments the Maya made with time and the impact of this on their culture, noting the Maya have integrated time into their worldview, measured it, socialized it, and also mythified it in a system of multiple associations unique in the world. Their records of the past and the future overreach the historical boundaries of their own civilizations and continue to fascinate scholars and laymen alike. She also remarked on the length of time that we can see evidence of this understanding being depicted, with the existence of multiple institutionalized ways of measuring time as seen in the use of different periods of calendars for short, medium, and long cycles, that records of these calendars remain from as far back as the 3rd century CE, reaching their greatest complexity in the late classic area as documented in hieroglyphic writing. So what did the knowledge that they have give the Mayan culture? The Maya and the advancements they were capable of shows they were a clever people and that there were those around them that realized this, with the Maya being at the top of the scale in the development of numerical, chronological, and calendrical systems as compared to other societies in the Western Hemisphere prior to contact with European civilization. But even so, the Maya were also aware that they were not the only clever people and that there were things they could learn from others as well. And there's evidence that they may have taken knowledge of time from those other cultures around them. It is not entirely clear whether the Maya invented all of the calendars they used or whether they adopted them from the neighboring Olmec people. So what have we learned? Of the 4 known codices, only 3, the Dresden Codex, Madrid Codex, and Paris Codex, are considered authentic. While there is evidence that supports the inauthenticity of the 4th, Grolier Codex, the important idea of information appearing differently than is depicted in the other codex is not something that only happens in the Grolier Codex, and so can't be an argument for or against it. There are cases in the Dresden Codex where information does appear differently than how it's normally depicted, with Vail and Hernandez suggesting this can be a transcriptional error from the information being copied by scribes, while Vail herself suggested it could be a cultural or language translation issue. Some final thoughts. The Maya Codices are some of the only surviving resources we have to use for research about the Maya and their culture. And while there is differences in how information is depicted, this is something that could be used to gain information as much as the codices themselves. We have to take the information we have available and use it to the best of our abilities if we want to gain as full a picture as possible about the Maya people and their culture. Thank you again for joining me today.